The blood on Mariah's cheek was not her own, but it might as well have been for the way it marked her as property of the Silver Spur Saloon in Dodge City, Kansas, where survival meant swallowing pride and pretending not to notice when men looked at her like she was something to be bought along with their whiskey. The year was 1878, and the only thing cheaper than a woman's dignity in this God-forsaken town was the rot-gut liquor that flowed like water through the swinging doors of every establishment lining Front Street. Mariah Hayes stood behind the bar on this sweltering August evening, her dark hair pinned up in a way that had once been neat, but now hung loose around her face, damp with perspiration, and the weight of 18 months spent serving drinks to men who thought her smile came with the price of admission. She had arrived in Dodge City in February of 1877, stepping off a wagon train with nothing but the clothes on her back and a hollowness in her chest where hope used to live. Her father had died of fever in Missouri, her mother had succumbed to grief 3 months later, and the farm had been sold to pay debts that Mariah had not even known existed. At 20 years old, she had found herself utterly alone, heading west because there was nowhere else to go, following the promise of opportunity that everyone said waited beyond the horizon. What she had found instead was the harsh reality that a woman without family or means had precious few options, and most of them led to places that polite society pretended did not exist. The Silver Spur was not the worst of the saloons, but it was far from the best. The owner, a thick-necked man named Dutch Corrigan, ran the place with an iron fist and an eye for profit that left little room for mercy. When Mariah had walked through his doors that first desperate week, Dutch had looked her up and down with an appraising stare that made her skin crawl, but he had offered her work serving drinks and clearing tables. The pay was barely enough to cover the tiny room she rented above the general store, but it kept her fed, and Dutch had made it clear from the beginning that as long as she was friendly with the customers and kept the whiskey flowing, he would not demand more from her than that. She knew other girls were not so fortunate. Tonight, the saloon was packed with cowboys fresh off a cattle drive, their pockets full of wages and their throats dry from weeks on the trail. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies, the piano player banging out a lively tune that could barely be heard over the roar of conversation and laughter. Mariah moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency, balancing a tray of shot glasses and dodging grabbing hands with the skill of someone who had learned that a quick step and a tight smile were the best defense against unwanted attention. She was pouring whiskey for a table of card players when she felt eyes on her, different from the usual leering stares that followed her through every shift. These eyes were steady, thoughtful, and when she glanced up, she found herself looking into the face of a man who seemed out of place among the rowdy crowd. He sat alone at a corner table, his hat pushed back to reveal sandy brown hair and a face that was weathered but kind, with lines around his eyes that spoke of long days under the sun and a quiet strength that needed no announcement. He was not watching her the way the other men did, with hunger or assumption. Instead, there was something almost respectful in his gaze, as though he saw past the saloon girl facade to the person beneath. Mariah felt her heart skip in a way that was both unwelcome and impossible to ignore. She had learned not to trust kindness, especially from men in places like this. Kindness was often just another currency, and everyone wanted something in return. She finished pouring drinks and made her way back to the bar, but she could feel the stranger's eyes following her, a weight that was neither threatening nor dismissive but something else entirely. An hour passed, then 2. The crowd grew louder as the night wore on, and Mariah's feet ached from hours of standing. Dutch was in a foul mood, barking orders and slapping the backside of one of the other girls hard enough to make her yelp. Mariah kept her head down, focusing on her work, trying not to think about how many more nights like this stretched ahead of her, an endless parade of smoke and noise and men who thought her worth less than the liquor in their glasses. It was nearly midnight when trouble started, as it so often did in places where alcohol and pride mixed in dangerous quantities. A cowboy named Bull Tenor, a regular who had already drunk enough to make his words slur and his hands unsteady, grabbed Mariah by the wrist as she passed his table. His grip was tight, painful, and when she tried to pull away, he yanked her closer, his breath hot and sour against her face. "Come on, darling, give us a smile," Bull said, his voice carrying that false cheerfulness that men used when they wanted to pretend their cruelty was just good fun. "You are too pretty to look so serious all the time." "Let go of me," Mariah said, keeping her voice level even as panic fluttered in her chest. She had dealt with Bull before, had learned that he was the type who liked to push boundaries, to see how far he could go before someone pushed back. "Not until you are nicer about it," Bull said, his fingers digging into her wrist hard enough to bruise. Around them, other men were watching, some with amusement, others with the wary anticipation of those who sensed violence coming but did not want to get involved. Before Mariah could respond, before she could even think about how to extract herself from the situation without making it worse, a shadow fell across the table. The stranger from the corner had risen from his seat and now stood beside them, his posture relaxed but his eyes hard as flint. "The lady asked you to let go," the stranger said, his voice quiet but carrying an authority that cut through the noise of the saloon like a knife. Bull looked up, his grip on Mariah loosening slightly as he sized up the newcomer. "This is not your business, friend." "I am making it my business," the stranger said, and there was something in his tone that made it clear this was not a suggestion or a request. It was a statement of fact. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other, and Mariah could feel the tension thrumming in the air between them. Bull was bigger, broader, but there was something about the stranger that suggested he was no one to be trifled with, a calm confidence that spoke of experience and capability. Finally, Bull released Mariah's wrist with a muttered curse and turned back to his drink, the fight draining out of him as quickly as it had flared up. The stranger stepped back, giving Mariah space, and she realized she was trembling, her wrist throbbing where Bull had held her. She looked up at the man who had intervened, wanting to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. Up close, he was even more striking, with eyes the color of summer sky and a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a fire. "Thank you," she managed finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that seemed almost old-fashioned, courtly even. "No thanks needed, miss. A man should not put his hands on a woman who does not want them there." There was something in the simplicity of that statement, in the straightforward decency of it, that made Mariah's eyes sting with unexpected tears. She blinked them back quickly, not wanting to fall apart in front of this stranger in front of anyone. "Can I get you anything?" she asked, falling back on the familiar script of her job, the safe territory of transaction and service. "Just coffee if you have it," he said. "I have had enough whiskey for one night." Mariah nodded and hurried back to the bar, grateful for the excuse to put some distance between them while she collected herself. Her hands shook as she poured coffee from the pot that Dutch kept warming on the stove, and she took a deep breath, forcing calm into her racing heart. When she returned to the stranger's table, he had settled back into his seat, his hat now resting on the table beside him. "Here you are," she said, setting the cup down carefully. "Thank you," he said, and then, as she turned to go, he added, "What is your name?" She hesitated, surprised by the question. Most men did not bother to ask, and those who did usually only wanted the information so they could call after her, make demands more personal. But there was genuine curiosity in this man's voice, no ulterior motive that she could detect. "Mariah," she said finally. "Mariah Hayes," he nodded as though committing it to memory. "I am Cole Bennett, pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Hayes." The formality of it, the respect inherent in calling her Miss Hayes rather than by her first name alone or some crude endearment, struck her as profoundly kind. She found herself smiling despite herself, a real smile that felt strange on her lips after so many false ones. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Bennet," she said. And then, because Dutch was watching from behind the bar with narrowed eyes, she added, "I should get back to work." Cole nodded, understanding in his eyes, and Mariah retreated, acutely aware of his presence for the rest of the night, a steady point of calm in the chaos of the saloon. When the Silver Spur finally closed in the early hours of the morning, Mariah's exhaustion ran bone deep. She helped the other girls clean up, wiping down tables and sweeping the floor while Dutch counted the night's take and grumbled about broken glasses and wasted liquor. As she stepped out into the cool, pre-dawn air, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders against the chill, she found Cole Bennet waiting on the wooden sidewalk, leaning against a post with the patience of a man who had nowhere else to be. "Mr. Bennet," she said, surprise coloring her voice. "What are you doing out here? Waiting to walk you home," he said simply. "It is not safe for a lady to be out alone at this hour." Mariah wanted to laugh at the description of her as a lady, wanted to point out that whatever claim she might have once had to that title had been forfeited the moment she started working in a saloon. But the earnestness in Cole's expression stopped her. He was not being ironic or cruel. He truly believed what he was saying. "That is very kind of you, but I am just around the corner," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the general store. "I will be fine." "I am sure you will be, but I would feel better knowing you got there safely," Cole said, pushing off from the post and falling into step beside her as she started walking. "If you do not mind the company, that is." Mariah did not mind, though she could not quite understand why this man was going out of his way for her. They walked in silence for a few moments, their footsteps echoing on the wooden planks, the town around them quiet and dark except for the occasional glow of a lamp in a window or the distant sound of a dog barking. "You are not from Dodge City," Mariah said finally, breaking the silence. It was not a question. "No, ma'am," Cole said. "I am from further south down in Texas. I have been working as a drover bringing cattle up from the ranches to the railhead here in Dodge, been doing it for about 5 years now." "That must be a hard life," Mariah said, thinking of the stories she had heard about the long drives, the weeks spent in the saddle, the danger from stampedes and rustlers and the elements. "It has its challenges," Cole admitted, "but it is honest work and I am good at it, or at least I was." There was something in his tone that made Mariah glance at him curiously. Cole was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, there was a weariness in his voice that she recognized all too well. "I have been thinking it is time for a change. I am 26 years old, and I have spent the last 5 years wandering from ranch to ranch, drive to drive. I have saved up a good amount of money, and I have been looking into buying some land of my own, maybe starting a small ranch. Settle down, put down roots, build something that lasts." "That sounds like a good dream," Mariah said softly, and she meant it. There was something achingly appealing about the idea of having a place to belong, a piece of earth to call your own. They had reached the general store, and Mariah stopped at the narrow stairs that led up to her room. She turned to face Cole, suddenly awkward, unsure how to end this strange, unexpected encounter. "Thank you for walking me home," she said, "and for earlier in the saloon, you did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Cole said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I could not stand by and watch that man hurt you." Mariah did not know what to say to that, so she simply nodded and started up the stairs, but as she reached the top, she heard Cole call up softly, "Miss Hayes, might I see you again, tomorrow maybe, if you have time during the day, I mean." Mariah paused, her hand on the doorknob. Every instinct told her to say no, to not let this man any closer, because closeness meant vulnerability and vulnerability meant pain. But there was something in Cole Bennett's voice, in the quiet hope of his question, that made her want to take the risk. "I usually have the mornings free," she said. "There is a small cafe on 2nd Avenue. I sometimes get breakfast there around 9. "I will see you there then," Cole said, and even in the darkness, Mariah could hear the smile in his voice. She slipped into her room and closed the door, leaning back against it as her heart hammered in her chest. She was being foolish, she told herself. She was letting hope creep in when she should know better. But as she lay down on her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, watching the first light of dawn paint patterns across the plaster, she could not quite suppress the flutter of anticipation that had taken root somewhere deep inside her. The next morning, Mariah woke with a nervousness that felt almost foreign after so many months of numb routine. She washed her face in the basin on her dresser, the water cold enough to make her gasp, and dressed carefully in her best day dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days but was clean and mended. She pinned her hair up with more care than usual, studying her reflection in the small, cracked mirror that hung on the wall. Her face was too thin, she thought, her eyes too shadowed, but there was color in her cheeks this morning, a brightness that had been missing for a long time. The cafe was a modest establishment run by a German couple, the Muellers, who served simple food at reasonable prices. Mariah arrived a few minutes before 9, ordering coffee and sitting at a table by the window where she could watch the street. Dodge City was already awake and bustling, wagons rolling past, shopkeepers opening their doors, the sounds of commerce and conversation filling the morning air. When Cole walked through the door at precisely 9 o'clock, Mariah felt her pulse quicken. He had cleaned up since last night, his hair damp as though freshly washed, his clothes brushed clean of trail dust. He spotted her immediately and crossed to her table with long, easy strides. "Miss Hayes," he said, removing his hat. "Thank you for meeting me." "Please call me Mariah," she said, gesturing to the seat across from her. "Miss Hayes makes me feel like a school teacher." Cole smiled as he sat down, a slow, warm smile that reached his eyes and made something in Mariah's chest tighten. "Then you must call me Cole. I am not much for formality, except when respect requires it." They ordered breakfast, eggs and bacon and fresh bread that Mrs. Mueller brought out steaming from the kitchen, and as they ate, they talked. Cole told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers. His parents had died when he was 17, a fever that swept through in winter and took them both within days of each other. The ranch had gone to his oldest brother, and Cole had struck out on his own, unwilling to work land that would never be his. Mariah, in turn, found herself sharing her own story, words spilling out that she had not spoken to anyone since arriving in Dodge City. She told him about her parents, about the farm in Missouri, about the long journey west and the desperate search for work that had led her to the Silver Spur. Cole listened without interruption, his attention complete and unwavering, and there was no judgment in his expression, only sympathy and understanding. "You deserve better than that place," Cole said when she finished, his voice quiet but fierce. "You deserve better than men like that bull tenor treating you like you are something less than human." "We do not always get what we deserve," Mariah said, trying to keep the bitterness out of her voice. "We get what we can survive." "That may be true," Cole said, leaning forward, his hands clasped on the table between them. "But surviving is not the same as living, Mariah, and you deserve to live, not just survive." The words hung in the air between them, and Mariah felt tears pricking at her eyes again, that damnable weakness that seemed to surface whenever Cole was near. She blinked them back and took a sip of her coffee, using the moment to compose herself. "What about you?" she asked, changing the subject. "You said you were thinking of buying land. Have you found anything?" Cole's expression brightened, and he began describing a piece of property he had seen about 30 miles south of Dodge City, near the Cimarron River. "It was not much," he said, "just 160 acres with a small creek running through it and good grazing land, but it had potential." The owner was an older man looking to sell and move back east to live with his daughter, and Cole had been negotiating a price. "I could build a house there," Cole said, his voice filled with a longing that Mariah recognized all too well. "Start small, maybe run cattle and horses. It would not be easy, but it would be mine, something I built with my own hands." It sounds wonderful, Mariah said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. They talked until their coffee grew cold and Mrs. Mueller began giving them pointed looks, clearly needing the table for other customers. Cole paid for their breakfast over Mariah's protests and walked her out into the bright morning sunshine. "I would like to see you again," Cole said as they stood on the sidewalk, the bustle of the town flowing around them, "if you are willing." "I would like that too," Mariah said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. They made plans to meet the next morning and the morning after that, and soon it became routine. Every day that Cole was in town, he would meet Mariah at the cafe, and they would talk over breakfast, hours slipping away as they shared stories and dreams and slowly, carefully, began to know each other. On the days when Mariah had to work the afternoon shift at the Silver Spur, Cole would walk her there, waiting until she was safely inside before tipping his hat and heading off to tend to his own business. And every night after closing, he would be waiting outside to walk her home, a silent guardian who asked nothing in return for his presence. Dutch Corrigan noticed, of course, and commented on it with a leer that made Mariah's skin crawl. "Got yourself a cowboy, have you? Just remember, girl, what you do on your own time is your business, but you better not let it interfere with your work here." Mariah assured him it would not, though the truth was that Cole's presence in her life was changing everything. The long nights at the Silver Spur became more bearable because she knew Cole would be waiting at the end of them. The crude remarks and grabbing hands bothered her less because she had something pure and good to hold on to, a reminder that not all men saw her as an object to be used. 3 weeks after they first met, Cole came to the cafe with news. He had finalized the purchase of the land near the Cimarron, signed the papers and paid the owner in full. He was now a landowner, a rancher, though he laughed at the title given that he did not yet have any livestock to speak of or even a proper house. "I am going to head out there tomorrow," he told Mariah, his excitement palpable. "Start clearing land for a cabin, get the lay of things. I will need to come back to Dodge City for supplies fairly regularly, but it means I will not be in town as much for a while." Mariah felt her heart sink, though she tried not to let it show. "That is wonderful, Cole. I am so happy for you." Cole reached across the table and took her hand, the first time he had touched her since that night in the saloon when he had intervened with Bull. His hand was warm, calloused from work, and the contact sent a jolt through her that was both thrilling and terrifying. "Mariah, I need to tell you something," he said, his blue eyes searching hers. "These past few weeks, getting to know you, they have been the best of my life. You are smart and brave and beautiful, and every moment I spend with you makes me want more. I know we have not known each other long, and I know your circumstances are difficult, but I have fallen in love with you." Mariah's breath caught, her mind racing. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that what he was saying was real and not some elaborate game or misguided charity. But fear held her back, the fear that had become her constant companion since her world fell apart. "Cole, she started, but he gently squeezed her hand, stopping her. "You do not have to say anything right now," he said. "I just needed you to know how I feel, but there is more. Mariah, I want you to come with me, not just to visit, but to stay. I want to marry you, give you my name, give you a home and a life away from that saloon and everything it represents. I know it is fast, and I know I am asking a lot, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Mariah stared at him, unable to speak, unable to process what he was saying. Marriage, a home, a clean start. It was everything she had dreamed of and thought lost forever, offered to her by a man she had known for less than a month. "I am not rich," Cole continued, his words tumbling out in a rush now as though he feared she would refuse before he finished. "I cannot promise you an easy life. The land is raw, and building a ranch will take years of hard work. But I can promise you that I will work every day to make you happy, to give you a life worth living. I can promise you respect and partnership and love, Mariah. I can promise you will never have to step foot in a place like the Silver Spur again, never have to endure the way men treat you there. Please, say you will at least think about it." Mariah pulled her hand back, not out of rejection but because she needed to think, needed space to sort through the chaos of emotions swirling inside her. Cole let her go without protest, waiting with the patient stillness that seemed fundamental to his nature. "Cole, I do not know what to say," Mariah said finally. "This is so much so fast. I care about you more than I thought possible, but marriage is. It is forever. What if you wake up one day and regret it? What if you realize you made a mistake tying yourself to a woman who worked in a saloon, who is not respectable in the eyes of decent people?" "Then those decent people can go to hell," Cole said with a vehemence that startled her. "I do not care what anyone thinks, Mariah. I care about you. I care about the woman you are, not where you have worked or what you have had to do to survive. You are the strongest person I have ever met, and I would be honored to have you as my wife." Tears were streaming down Mariah's face now, and she did not bother to wipe them away. "I am scared," she whispered. "I am scared to hope, scared to believe this is real." Cole rose from his seat and came around the table, kneeling beside her chair so they were eye level. He took both her hands in his touch gentle but firm. "I am scared too," he admitted. "I am scared of failing you, of not being able to give you the life you deserve, but I would rather be scared with you than safe without you. Please, Mariah, take a chance on me, on us." Mariah looked into his eyes, those clear blue eyes that had watched her with such kindness from the first moment, and she felt the last of her defenses crumble. Life had taken so much from her, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was finally giving something back. "Yes," she said, the word barely more than a breath. "Yes, I will marry you." The joy that lit up Cole's face was like watching the sun break through storm clouds, and when he pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest, Mariah felt something inside her that had been broken begin to mend. They were married 3 days later by a justice of the peace, a brief ceremony with the Muellers as witnesses. Mariah wore the same blue dress she had worn to their first breakfast, and Cole produced a simple gold band that he slipped onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly. When the justice pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed her with a tenderness that made her forget, for just a moment, all the hardship and pain that had led her to this point. Telling Dutch Corrigan that she was leaving was one of the most satisfying moments of Mariah's life. The saloon owner had blustered and threatened, claiming she owed him money for room and board, but Cole had calmly pulled out a roll of bills and paid whatever inflated sum Dutch claimed, just to be done with it. The look on Dutch's face when Mariah walked out of the silver Spur for the last time, Cole's hand warm and solid in hers, was something she would treasure forever. They loaded up a wagon with supplies from the general store, everything they would need to start their new life. Tools and lumber, food staples, blankets and dishes, seeds for planting and feed for the animals they would eventually acquire. Mariah packed her few belongings, which fit easily into a single carpet bag, and said goodbye to the small room above the store that had been her refuge for the past 18 months. As they rolled out of Dodge City in the early morning light, the town shrinking behind them, Mariah felt lighter than she had in years. She sat beside Cole on the wagon seat, the September sun warm on her face, the endless Kansas sky stretching above them, and for the first time since her parents died, she felt something dangerously close to happiness. The journey to their land took most of the day, the wagon wheels creaking over the rutted trail that wound through the prairie. They passed herds of cattle grazing in the distance, their presence a reminder of the great drives that had made Kansas famous. And at one point, a group of riders appeared on the horizon, cowboys heading toward Dodge City with the same restless energy that seemed to define everyone in this wild, untamed territory. Cole pointed out landmarks as they traveled, showing Mariah the way the land changed from flat grassland to gentle rolling hills, the occasional stand of cottonwood trees marking where water could be found. He talked about his plans for the ranch, where he wanted to build the house and barn, which sections of land would be best for grazing and which for planting. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Mariah found herself caught up in the vision he was painting, seeing not just the raw land but the possibility it represented. They reached the property as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The land was beautiful in its simplicity, open and rolling with prairie grass swaying in the breeze. The creek Cole had mentioned cutting a silver line through the middle of the property. There was a small structure already standing, not quite a cabin but more than a lean-to, that the previous owner had used for storage and shelter during his time on the land. Cole helped Mariah down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure on her waist, and together they stood looking out over what was now their home. The silence was profound after the constant noise of Dodge City, broken only by the whisper of wind through grass and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. "What do you think?" Cole asked, and Mariah could hear the nervousness in his voice, the need for her approval. "I think it is perfect," Mariah said, and she meant it. This place was everything she had not known she wanted: space and freedom and the chance to build something new. That night, they made camp in the small structure, spreading blankets on the dirt floor and cooking beans and bacon over a fire outside. As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast sky, Cole and Mariah sat side by side, shoulders touching, the warmth of the fire on their faces. It was their wedding night, and though there was no bed and no privacy to speak of, when Cole kissed her, gentle at first and then with growing passion, Mariah felt a rightness settle over her like a benediction. They made love slowly, carefully, Cole's touch reverent as he helped her out of her dress, his hands exploring the curve of her waist, the softness of her skin. Mariah had been kissed before by men who meant nothing, had endured unwanted touches in the saloon that left her feeling dirty and used, but this was different. This was about connection and trust, about two people choosing each other. When Cole entered her, there was a brief moment of pain, but it faded quickly, replaced by a pleasure that built slowly, a warmth spreading through her body that had nothing to do with the fire still burning outside. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the blankets, Cole's arms around her, her head resting on his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Mariah Bennett," Cole whispered into her hair, and the sound of her new name, the claiming of it, made her smile in the darkness. "I love you too," she whispered back, the words still new and strange on her tongue but true, so completely true. The following weeks were a blur of hard work and simple joys. Cole and Mariah fell into a routine, rising with the sun and working until darkness forced them to stop. Cole began building a proper cabin, felling trees from a stand near the creek and hauling the logs back to the site he had chosen for their home. The work was backbreaking, and Mariah helped where she could, holding logs steady while Cole notched and fitted them, mixing clay and grass for chinking to fill the gaps between the timbers. Mariah took charge of creating a home from the rough materials they had. She dug a garden plot and planted the seeds they had brought, covering the tender shoots with brush to protect them from rabbits and deer. She learned to cook over an open fire, her meals simple but filling, and began experimenting with recipes she remembered from her childhood. She washed their clothes in the creek, draping them over bushes to dry in the sun, and at night she would mend and patch by firelight while Cole worked on harnesses or sharpened tools. It was not an easy life, but it was theirs, and Mariah found a satisfaction in the work that she had never experienced in the endless, meaningless toil of the saloon. Here, every task had purpose, every effort brought them closer to the life they were building together. Cole made trips back to Dodge City every few weeks for supplies, and Mariah went with him the first few times, though she found that she preferred the quiet of their land to the noise and crowds of the town. On one of these trips, they stopped by the Mueller's Cafe, and Mrs. Mueller exclaimed over how well Mariah looked, How different she seemed from the hollow-eyed girl who used to sit alone by the window. "Marriage agrees with you," Mrs. Mueller said with a knowing smile, and Mariah could not help but agree. By November, the cabin was finished, a sturdy structure with 2 rooms and a real roof overhead. It was not fancy, but it had a stone fireplace that Cole had built with his own hands and windows with real glass that let in the light. Mariah cried the first time she walked through the door, overwhelmed by the reality of having a home again, a place that was truly hers. Cole bought cattle in December, a small herd of 20 head that he drove back to their land with the help of 2 cowboys he hired for the job. The cattle were the beginning of their ranch, the foundation on which they would build their future. Cole also purchased 2 horses, a sturdy gelding for himself and a gentle mare for Mariah, who had admitted that her riding experience was limited to the occasional farm horse back in Missouri. Winter came hard and fast that year, bringing snow and bitter cold that tested them in new ways. The cabin, for all its sturdiness, was drafty, and they huddled close to the fire at night, wrapped in every blanket they owned. The cattle required constant attention, and Cole spent long hours making sure they had access to water and enough feed to survive the harsh weather. But there were moments of beauty too, mornings when Mariah would wake to find the world transformed by snow, everything white and pristine and silent. Cole would hold her close, and they would watch the sunrise together, the sky turning shades of pink and orange, and Mariah would think about how far she had come. From that desperate girl in the silver Spur to a woman with a home and a husband and a future that stretched out before her like the endless prairie. Christmas came and went quietly, just the 2 of them exchanging small gifts. Cole had carved Mariah a wooden comb, the handle decorated with an intricate pattern of flowers, and she had made him a shirt from fabric she had purchased on their last trip to town. They roasted a chicken and made biscuits, and Cole produced a bottle of whiskey that they shared, toasting to their first holiday together and the many more to come. As winter gave way to spring in 1879, the land came alive with color and sound. Wildflowers bloomed across the prairie, painting the grass with splashes of purple and yellow, and the cattle grew fat on the new grass. Mariah's garden flourished, providing them with fresh vegetables, and she began putting up preserves and pickles for the coming winter, jars lining the shelves Cole had built in the cabin. It was in April that Mariah realized something had changed in her body. Her monthly courses had stopped, and she felt a constant low-level nausea, especially in the mornings. She recognized the signs, having seen enough pregnant women in her life to know what they meant, but she waited another few weeks to be sure before telling Cole. She chose an evening when the work was done and they were sitting outside the cabin, watching the sun set over their land. Cole had his arm around her shoulders, and Mariah leaned into his warmth, gathering her courage. "Cole, I have something to tell you," she said, her voice quiet. He turned to look at her, concern flickering across his face. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine," she said quickly, then smiled. "Better than fine, actually. Cole, I am with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Cole just stared at her, his expression frozen in surprise, and then slowly, a smile spread across his face, wide and bright and filled with such joy that it took Mariah's breath away. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, and she could feel him trembling. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Mariah, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Cole said, pulling back to cup her face in his hands. "You have given me everything, Mariah. A home, a purpose, and now a family. I love you so much." They kissed, long and sweet, and when they finally broke apart, Mariah felt tears on her cheeks, though she could not have said whether they were hers or Cole's or both. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months, though the heat made Mariah uncomfortable, and her belly seemed to grow larger every day. Cole was attentive to the point of being overbearing, constantly asking if she needed anything, insisting she rest while he took on more of the work. Mariah appreciated his concern but also pushed back when necessary, reminding him that women had been having babies since the beginning of time and she was not made of glass. They made another trip to Dodge City in July, this time to see a doctor and make arrangements for the birth. The doctor, an older man with kind eyes and gentle hands, examined Mariah and pronounced her healthy and strong, predicting the baby would arrive sometime in late December or early January. He recommended they find a midwife to assist with the delivery, and gave them the name of a woman who lived about 10 miles from their property, a widow named Mrs. Calloway who had delivered dozens of babies over the years. Cole and Mariah visited Mrs. Calloway the following week, riding out on horseback through a landscape made lush by summer rains. The widow was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and hands that moved with efficient confidence as she examined Mariah. She agreed to attend the birth and gave Mariah a list of supplies to have ready when the time came. As autumn arrived and the leaves on the cottonwoods turned gold, Mariah found herself increasingly anxious about the approaching birth. She had seen women die in childbirth, had heard the stories of babies born too soon or too sick to survive, and fear crept in during the quiet moments, settling heavy in her chest. Cole sensed her worry and did his best to reassure her. "You are strong," he would tell her, kissing her forehead. "Stronger than you know, and I will be right here with you every moment. We will get through this together." The baby arrived on a snowy night in early January of 1880, 3 weeks earlier than the doctor had predicted. Mariah woke to cramping pains that quickly intensified, and Cole rode through the dark and cold to fetch Mrs. Calloway while Mariah paced the cabin, breathing through contractions that came faster and harder as the night wore on. Mrs. Calloway arrived just as dawn was breaking, her calm presence immediately soothing. She took charge with the ease of long experience, directing Cole to boil water and gather towels while she helped Mariah onto the bed, checking her progress and murmuring encouragement. The labor was long and difficult, hours blurring together in a haze of pain and exhaustion. Mariah cried out, gripping Cole's hand so hard she thought she might break his fingers, but he never left her side, his voice a constant anchor as he whispered words of love and encouragement. Finally, as the afternoon sun streamed through the cabin windows, Mrs. Calloway announced it was time to push, and Mariah bore down with everything she had, her body straining with effort. There was a moment of intense pressure, a burning pain, and then sudden relief as the baby slipped free, its first cries filling the cabin with sound. "It is a boy," Mrs. Calloway said, her face breaking into a smile as she cleaned the infant and wrapped him in a soft blanket. "A fine, healthy boy." She placed the baby in Mariah's arms, and Mariah looked down at her son, at his red, wrinkled face and tiny fists waving in the air, and felt love crash over her like a wave. Cole was beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his eyes wet with tears as he stared at their child. "He is perfect," Cole said, his voice choked. "Mariah, he is perfect." They named him Matthew after Cole's father, and for the next few weeks, their world contracted to the small space of the cabin, to the rhythm of feedings and diaper changes and sleepless nights. Matthew was a good baby, alert and curious, and watching Cole hold their son, his large hands so gentle, his expression full of wonder, made Mariah fall in love with her husband all over again. Spring came again, and then summer, the seasons turning in their endless cycle. The ranch grew, Cole adding to the cattle herd and building a proper barn to house the horses and equipment. Mariah tended her garden and cared for Matthew, who was growing fast, his toothless smiles and delighted laughter becoming the soundtrack of their days. Life was not without challenges. There were droughts that tested their water supply, and one terrifying week when Matthew came down with a fever that had Mariah and Cole taking turns holding him, praying for the illness to break. There were times when money was tight, when Cole had to sell cattle he had planned to keep just to cover expenses, and the constant work wore on them both, leaving them exhausted and short-tempered. But there were also moments of profound joy. The first time Matthew took steps, wobbling across the cabin floor into Mariah's waiting arms. The day Cole came home with a puppy, a shaggy mutt he had traded for at a neighboring ranch, watching Matthew squeal with delight as the dog licked his face. The evening spent sitting on the porch as the sun set, Matthew drowsing in Mariah's lap while Cole played harmonica, the simple melody floating out over their land. In the fall of 1881, when Matthew was nearly 2, Mariah discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she was less anxious, her body remembering what to expect, and the pregnancy was easier than the first. Their daughter was born in May of 1882, arriving quickly and with far less drama than her brother. They named her Sarah, after Mariah's mother, and she had Cole's blue eyes and Mariah's dark hair, a perfect combination that made everyone who saw her remark on her beauty. The years rolled on, each bringing its own mix of hardship and happiness. The ranch continued to grow, slowly but steadily, until Cole was running over 100 head of cattle and had hired a couple of hands to help with the work. They added onto the cabin, building a second story with proper bedrooms for the children, and Mariah planted trees around the house, dreaming of the day when they would provide shade and beauty. Matthew grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the work of the ranch with an eagerness that made Cole beam with pride. Sarah was her mother's daughter, bright and curious, constantly asking questions and getting into everything. She had a gift for finding trouble. Whether it was climbing trees she was too small to descend from, or helping with the laundry by dumping an entire basket of clean clothes into the mud. In 1885, when Matthew was 5 and Sarah 3, Mariah gave birth to twins, 2 more boys who they named James and Robert. The twins were a handful from the beginning, crying in tandem and demanding constant attention, but they also brought a new energy to the household, their identical faces and mischievous grins keeping everyone on their toes. Through it all, Mariah and Cole's love deepened and matured. They had their arguments, of course, disagreements about money or child rearing or how to handle problems on the ranch. There were times when the stress of their life left them snapping at each other, tempers frayed by exhaustion and worry. But they always came back together, always found their way to forgiveness and understanding, the foundation of trust and respect they had built strong enough to weather any storm. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cole surprised Mariah with a trip back to Dodge City, leaving the children with Mrs. Calloway and her now-grown son for a rare night away. They checked into the Dodge House Hotel, a real luxury after years of rough living, and dressed in their best clothes for dinner at the hotel restaurant. Sitting across from Cole at a table set with white linen and gleaming silverware, Mariah marveled at how different her life was from that night 10 years ago when she had been serving drinks at the Silver Spur. She thought about the woman she had been then, hollow and desperate, and compared her to who she was now. A wife, a mother, a partner in building something lasting and good. "What are you thinking about?" Cole asked, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Mariah said softly. "How you saved me, Cole. You gave me a life when I had none." Cole shook his head, squeezing her hand gently. "You saved yourself, Mariah. I just gave you the opportunity. Everything we have, everything we built, you did that with your own strength and courage. I am the lucky one that you took a chance on me." They talked late into the night, reminiscing about their early days, laughing over memories that had seemed so difficult at the time, but now held a certain sweetness. When they finally retired to their room, they made love with the slow, practiced ease of long familiarity, knowing exactly how to please each other, their bodies moving together in perfect synchronization. The next morning, as they prepared to return to the ranch and their children, Mariah stood at the window of their hotel room, looking out over Dodge City. The town had changed in the decades since she had left, becoming more civilized. the rough edges slowly being smoothed away as Kansas moved toward statehood. She wondered briefly what had happened to Dutch Corrigan and the Silver Spur, whether the saloon still stood or if it had been swept away by progress. But the curiosity was fleeting, because her real life was not here in this town that held only painful memories. Her life was 30 miles south, on a ranch that she and Cole had carved out of raw prairie through sheer determination and love. Her life was in the sound of her children's laughter and the warmth of her husband's arms, and the knowledge that she had survived the worst and come out the other side stronger. They loaded up the wagon and headed home, Mariah's hand resting on Cole's thigh as he drove, the familiar landscape passing by. When they crested the final hill and saw their ranch spread out below, the cabin and barn, the corrals and fenced pastures, the cattle grazing peacefully, Mariah felt her heart swell with a contentment so profound it was almost painful. This was her kingdom, her paradise, built on love and hard work, and the second chance that Cole Bennett had offered her with his last name and his whole heart. The years continued their march, bringing both joy and sorrow. In 1887, Cole's oldest brother died, and they made the long journey to Texas for the funeral, introducing the children to relatives they had never met. It was a difficult trip, emotionally draining, but it also gave Mariah a glimpse into Cole's past, the family and history that had shaped him into the man she loved. In 1889, Mrs. Calloway passed away peacefully in her sleep, and Mariah wept at the funeral, remembering the woman who had brought her children into the world with such skill and kindness. The loss hit harder than she expected, a reminder that the people who shaped our lives do not stay forever, that time and death eventually claim everyone. But there were celebrations too. Matthew's graduation from the small school that had been established in the growing community nearby. His reading certificate, presented with pride at a ceremony attended by all the families in the area. Sarah's first dance, watching her daughter twirl around the barn that they had cleared out for a community social, her face flushed with happiness. The twins learning to ride, their whoops of excitement echoing across the prairie as they raced their ponies. In 1891, when Mariah was 34 years old, she gave birth to their last child, a girl they named Emma. The baby was a surprise, born when Mariah had thought her childbearing years were behind her, but she was welcomed with open arms, doted on by her older siblings and cherished by her parents. As the 1890s progressed, the West continued to change. Kansas had become a state in 1861, but the frontier spirit that had defined the region during Mariah's early years, there was slowly fading. Barbed wire crisscrossed the prairie, carving up the open range, and the great cattle drives that had brought coal north became less frequent as railroads expanded and ranching became more localized. The ranch prospered, however, adapting to the changing times. Cole had a gift for breeding cattle, developing a herd known for its quality, and buyers came from as far as Kansas City to purchase his stock. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, able to provide for their children and even set aside money for the future. Matthew, now a young man of 20, had taken on more responsibility for the ranch, working side by side with his father and proving himself capable and wise beyond his years. There was talk of him courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a pretty girl named Elizabeth who had caught his eye at a church social. And Mariah found herself contemplating the prospect of grandchildren with a mix of excitement and disbelief at how quickly time had passed. Sarah, at 18, was preparing to attend a teaching college in Topeka, having inherited her mother's quick mind and love of learning. Cole had been skeptical at first about the expense and the idea of his daughter living so far away, but Mariah had argued passionately for giving Sarah the opportunity, and eventually he had relented. The twins, now 16, were inseparable as always, both planning to stay and work the ranch, and Emma, at 9, was still young enough to be coddled, the baby of the family. On a warm evening in June of 1900, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, Mariah and Cole sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over land that had been theirs for more than 2 decades. The children were inside, the sounds of their laughter and conversation drifting out through the open windows, and Mariah leaned her head on Cole's shoulder with a sigh of contentment. "Do you ever think about that night we met?" Mariah asked, her voice soft. "In the silver Spur when you stood up to bull tenor for me." Cole was quiet for a moment, his arm tightening around her. "I think about it all the time," he said. "I think about how different my life would be if I had not walked into that saloon, if I had not seen you. I thank God every day that I did." "I was so lost back then," Mariah said, memories of that time washing over her. "I did not think I would ever be happy again, did not think I deserved happiness, and then you came along and offered me everything." "We saved each other," Cole said, echoing the words he had spoken so many years before. "You gave my life meaning, Mariah. This ranch, our children, everything good in my life comes back to you." They sat in silence as the sky darkened and stars began to appear, the vast canopy of the heavens stretching overhead. Mariah thought about the girl she had been, working in that saloon to survive, and marveled at the journey that had brought her here. It had not been easy, and there had been moments when she thought she might break under the weight of it all, but she had endured. They had endured together. "I love you, Cole Bennett," Mariah said, turning to kiss him, the gesture as natural as breathing after more than 2 decades together. "And I love you, Mariah Bennett," Cole replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. "Always have, always will." The years ahead would bring more changes, more challenges and triumphs. Matthew would marry Elizabeth, and they would build a house on a corner of the ranch, starting their own family and adding to the legacy. Sarah would return from college with a teaching certificate and a passion for education, eventually opening a school for the children in the area. The twins would prove themselves invaluable in running the expanding ranch, and Emma would grow into a spirited young woman with her own dreams and ambitions. There would be hard times too, droughts and economic downturns, illnesses and losses that tested them. Cole would develop arthritis in his later years, his joints stiffening from decades of hard physical labor, and Mariah would nurse him through the pain with the same devotion he had always shown her. They would lose friends and neighbors, would attend funerals and comfort those left behind, would feel the weight of mortality pressing closer as they aged. But through it all, they would have each other. The love that had begun in a chance encounter in a Dodge City saloon would sustain them through everything life threw their way, growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. On a spring day in 1915, when Mariah was 58 and Cole 63, they would celebrate their 36th wedding anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren, the ranch house filled with noise and love, and the evidence of a life well lived. Cole would stand to make a toast, his voice still strong despite his years, and would speak of the courage it took for a young woman to say yes to a cowboy's proposal, to take a chance on a future that was uncertain and difficult but also filled with promise. "Mariah Bennett took a risk when she married me," Cole would say, his eyes finding hers across the crowded room. "She could have stayed in Dodge City, could have found an easier path. But she chose to come with me to build this life we have together, and every day since has been a gift. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Mariah would cry, as she always did when Cole spoke from the heart, and their children would applaud, and the grandchildren would ask why Grandma was crying if she was happy. And Mariah would gather them close, and try to explain that sometimes tears were not about sadness, but about being so full of joy and gratitude that it had to overflow somehow. She would think in that moment about the winding path that had led her here, from the despair of the silver Spur to the fullness of this life surrounded by family. She would think about the cowboy who had offered her his last name and a clean start, who had seen something in her worth saving when she could not see it herself. She would think about love, real love, the kind that endured through hardship and celebrated the good times, the kind that grew stronger rather than weaker as the years passed. And she would know with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice all those years ago. That saying yes to Cole Bennett had been the best decision of her life, the one that had transformed her from a woman merely surviving into someone truly living. The sun would set that evening on a house full of love and laughter, on a ranch built by two people who had started with nothing but each other and had created something beautiful and lasting. And as Mariah and Cole would stand together on the porch, watching their family through the windows, hands clasped and hearts intertwined, they would know that all of this had been worth every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt, because in the end, love had been enough. It had been more than enough. It had been everything. Years later, when their time on Earth was done and they had passed peacefully into whatever lay beyond, their children would tell stories about Mariah and Cole Bennett, about the love story that had begun in a saloon and grown into a legacy. They would speak of their mother's strength and their father's kindness, of the partnership that had built not just a ranch but a family, a future, a testament to what was possible when two people chose each other and held on through everything. And perhaps on quiet evenings when the wind whispered across the Kansas prairie, when the sun set in shades of gold and pink over land that had witnessed so much history, those who lived on the ranch would feel the presence of those who came before, would sense the love that had soaked into every timber and stone, would understand that some things, the truly important things, never really end. The story of Mariah and Cole would live on, passed down through generations, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found, that a chance encounter could change everything, that love, real and true and lasting, was always worth fighting for. And somewhere, in whatever realm souls inhabit after the body gives way, Mariah and Cole would be together still, their hands clasped, their hearts beating as one, eternally grateful for the day their paths crossed in a rough saloon in Dodge City, Kansas, when a desperate woman and a kind-hearted cowboy found in each other exactly what they needed to not just survive, but to truly live. The ranch would continue for generations, the land passed down from parent to child, each inheritor adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the foundation laid by Mariah and Cole. Matthew's descendants would expand the cattle operation, adapting to new technologies and markets while maintaining the quality and integrity that had been the ranch's hallmark from the beginning. Sarah's passion for education would inspire several of her grandchildren to become teachers, spreading literacy and learning throughout the region. The twins' line would produce skilled horsemen and ranchers, and Emma's children would carry on her spirit of adventure and determination. But it was always the story of how it all began that captured the imagination, the tale of the saloon girl and the cowboy who loved her. It became family legend, told and retold, embellished perhaps but always true in its essentials. That Cole had seen Mariah at her lowest moment and offered her not charity but partnership, not pity but respect. That Mariah had found the courage to accept, to trust, to hope again. That together they had built something that lasted, something that mattered. In 1920, when the ranch celebrated its 40th anniversary, the family gathered to dedicate a marker commemorating Mariah and Cole's arrival on the land in 1878. It was a simple stone, engraved with their names and the dates of their lives, but it stood as testament to the enduring power of their love and their legacy. The world changed around the ranch, as the world always does. Automobiles replaced horses for everyday travel, electricity came to rural Kansas, and the great wars of the early 20th century touched even this remote corner of the prairie. But through all the changes, the ranch remained, a constant in an uncertain world, rooted in the values that Mariah and Cole had instilled: hard work, integrity, family, and above all, love. When historians later studied the period of westward expansion and the settling of the frontier, they would often focus on the famous figures, the outlaws and lawmen, the cattle barons and railroad magnates. But the true story of the West was written by people like Mariah and Cole Bennett, ordinary individuals who faced extraordinary challenges and persevered, who built homes and raised families and created communities out of raw wilderness. Their story was the story of thousands of others who came west seeking a better life, who endured hardship and loss and kept going anyway, who planted roots in harsh soil and coaxed them to grow. It was a story of resilience and determination, of the human capacity to start over, to heal, to love even after being broken. And at its heart, it was a love story, pure and simple. A tale as old as time but made new in the particulars of their lives. A woman who had lost everything finding a man willing to give her everything. A man who had wandered without purpose, discovering a reason to build and plant and stay. Two people who might never have met, who came from different places and different circumstances, finding each other at exactly the right moment and recognizing in each other the possibility of something more. The land they claimed and cultivated would outlast them, passing to new hands and new generations, but the mark they left on it was indelible. Every fence post Cole sank, every seed Mariah planted, every child they raised and every value they instilled became part of the fabric of the place, woven so tightly that it could never be undone. On still nights, when the Kansas wind died down and stars blazed overhead in that vast prairie sky, it was possible to imagine them still there, Mariah and Cole, sitting on the porch of the home they built together, watching over the land they loved and the family they created. It was possible to feel their presence in the weathered wood of the old cabin, in the worn path between house and barn, in the ancient cottonwoods they had planted as saplings that now stood tall and strong. Their story had a happy ending not because it was easy or perfect, but because they chose to make it so. Every day, through every challenge and every joy, they chose each other, chose to keep building, chose to believe that the life they were creating was worth the effort. And in the end, that choice, repeated over decades, transformed two broken individuals into something whole, something beautiful, something that would echo through time long after they were gone. The cowboy had offered her his last name and a clean start, but what he had really given her was hope. And what she had given him in return was purpose, a reason to stop wandering and start building, a home not just in the physical sense but in the truest meaning of the word, a place where love lived and thrived and grew. That was their legacy, more valuable than land or cattle or material wealth. They had proven that it was possible to start over, that past mistakes and circumstances did not have to define the future, that love could heal and transform and create something lasting from the ruins of what came before. And so the story ended where all the best stories end, with love triumphant, with family gathered close, with two people who had found each other against all odds and had built a life that honored both the struggle it took to get there and the grace that made it possible. Mariah and Cole Bennett had lived fully and loved deeply, and in doing so, they had created something that would outlive them both, a legacy of hope and resilience, and the enduring power of love to transform even the darkest night into dawn. The prairie wind continued to blow across the Kansas landscape, carrying with it the whispers of those who had come before, the stories of courage and love that had shaped the land. And among those whispers, clear and true, was the story of a saloon girl named Mariah who had been offered a chance at redemption by a cowboy named Cole, and how together they had built not just a ranch but a legacy that would endure for generations. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the years as a reminder of what was possible when two people chose to face the world together, hand in hand, heart to heart, building their future one day at a time with love as their foundation. And they lived happily ever after, in the truest and most complete sense of those words, Their love story a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed dark, a testament to the power of second chances and the transformative nature of love freely given and gratefully received.